first we're going to start with Anita. Anita is incredibly involved in many boards and associations, and I'm just incredibly impressed by what you've done over there in the city. So I'm just going to name a few. From 2002 to 2005, she served as commissioner for the Vancouver Board of Parks and Recreation. Before that, from 1990 to 2002, she was elected on the board of directors for the Douglas Park Community Association. Since 2005, she's been active with the Vancouver Society for Outdoor Pools and Save Our Parks Association. And this is not in the right order. In 1994, she also founded the Douglas Park Arts Committee, and apparently she's still active on all those things. So a big round of applause and welcome, Anita. Thank you.
Before I talk about why Vancouver has an elected park board, I wanted to talk about how cities do govern their parks. Most cities and also regional and county governments in North America have some sort of group of people who meets on parks and recreation issues. But some cities have committees which are mostly advisory, and some have boards of park and recreation which are mostly appointed. It doesn't seem to follow the size of the city. Surrey has a committee, and it's a fairly big place. Burnaby's is appointed, Vancouver's is elected. The city of Port Alberni, where I grew up, is not big, but it has a appointed board of parks and recreation. And in fact, my father was a parks commissioner in Port Alberni in 1960, so I'm actually a second generation to serve on the park board in my family. Why exactly Vancouver has an elected park board is kind of lost in the midst of time, but it had one very early. I mean, Vancouver was incorporated in 1886. It got its first park, Stanley Park, in 1887, leased from the federal government, which had been using it as a military reserve. And in 1888, it formed a parks committee, in this case, a parks committee that dealt with one park. And that only lasted less than 2 years, and then they decided to have an elected park board. Now, I looked and can't figure out what the reason for that was, but they did elect a 3-person park board starting in 1890. So it's a long time ago. Now, it was done by a bylaw, and I sometimes wonder if the city of Vancouver might have come to regret that, because almost immediately you started getting tensions between the elected council and the elected park board, mostly over funding. The park board, of course, thought they should have more funds, and the city was the one that decided how much they got. But there was also, the park board at that time could not sign leases on its own. It couldn't purchase land on its own. It all had to come from the city. And sometimes the city would go ahead and start negotiating to buy or get land for new parks at Hastings, for example, which was the second park. And the park board kind of got left out until the very end when they said, hey, we've got this land for a park for you. So there was a bit of tension there when the park board felt that the city was doing things without their involvement. So on council's part, they sometimes felt that the park board should be consulting with them on the details of what they spent, and there was tension there also. Now this continued for decades, literally for decades. In 1921, park board superintendent, what we call manager today, actually informed the park board, a legal opinion that council could not decide the details of any spending of funds that the park board raised other than the tax levy. So this is like the fees and charges that that they were charging for various things. And nor could they direct the details of park board policy. The only thing that council had control over was the total amount of money and also the distribution of tax levies. But eventually the park board got power over that too. The park board today can decide the details of how the property tax levy that is granted from city council is spent. It's council, however, that has the power to decide the total amount, how much. So there's still a bit of tension there. They work together. I'm not saying that there's an adversarial relationship, but there is that kind of odd distribution of powers. And I think because the park board is elected and feel that they have to be accountable to the people who elected them, it kind of enhances that kind of, the park board will say that, they're hearing from the community that they want funds spent on this and maybe council should put a little more in the kitty, and council says, where are we supposed to get the money for this? So you do get that kind of give and take. Now, was there ever any question that the park board should be elected or not? Well, in 1904, the city was growing. It was starting to add parks. There was a population and development boom at the time. And they added 2 more parks commissioners, so they were now electing 5. So this seems to indicate that they thought it was working because there was no clamor at the time for a park board not to be elected. And then in 1929, Vancouver, which at that time didn't go much beyond 16th Avenue, amalgamated with what was called South Vancouver and Point Grey, which had been separate municipalities. Now, neither of them had even an appointed board. They had parks committees. But when they came on board, they chose to keep an elected park board, and they increased it to 7, which is how many we have today, 7 commissioners. At the time, most of what they had were parks, field houses, pool houses, for outdoor pools, mostly wading pools, pardon me. They didn't really have much infrastructure, but this changed during the Depression when they got money from the federal government and the provincial government because they wanted people employed. And they started getting requests from the public for facilities. Now, the park board got on board with this, and they worked with the Vancouver Town Planning Commission to get community centers and recreation facilities built, and they were often built adjacent to parks. But there was a great deal of community involvement with this, particularly after the Second World War, when you got the baby boom from 9/11, and people decided that they really wanted these community centers. And so it wasn't just driven by the park board and the city government. It was driven by the community. They formed community associations. They raised funds. They participated in planning. They lobbied their neighborhoods to pass what they called neighborhood area initiatives, local area initiatives. These were like the referendum that we vote on every 3 years, except they were done in a smaller scale in neighborhoods to get them passed so they could build these. And eventually they made a formal relationship with the community associations to run these community centers. And these over 20 community associations still exist today and have a joint operating agreement with the park board. And this is very interesting. It's near and dear to me because I was on a community association board for 6 years and then on committees for another 6. And those boards are also elected. So you get a kind of double accountability there. The park board is elected and the community associations are elected. Now, as far as having an elected park board goes, I like it because it makes the park board more accountable to the people. And I think that any tensions you have between council and also sometimes with staff and the elected commissioner, that accountability means that you can remind them that you're accountable with the people. And it also means that the community associations can remind you that you are accountable to the people and also other user groups. But I think our electoral system is a problem, because we have an at-large system. We're a big city now, there's 600,000 people. And I know a lot of people don't even know there is a park board. If they do, they don't know it's elected. They don't vote in the elections. And we also have, you know, financing. We have no spending limits. And I think that we could have a better accountable park board that is elected if we had some sort of reform of the electoral system. Because I think there's more distance between the park board and the people than there has to be. And I think it's more the system by which we elect the park board rather than the fact that we have an elected park board itself. Thank you.